So welcome back after a gap of more than a week. Unfortunately, we could not have the classes last week because of some reasons. So we will resume the class today, and we will continue from where we stopped in the previous week. So I will share the screen, and we begin with the key passage that we will be dealing today, which comes as the theme for today's class. Okay. Right. Okay. Exodus chapter 13, 2 verses 2. Consecrate to me all the firstborn, whatever is the first to open the womb among the people of Israel, both of man and of beast is mine. Then Moses said to the people, remember this day in which you came out from Egypt, out of the house of slavery, for by a strong hand the Lord brought you out from this place. So we will be dealing with two issues today. One is about the consecration of the firstborn, and then a reference to an ancient text of the unleavened bread, which is actually not related to the Passover feast. And then the preparation to come out of Egypt and the route that they take, and the encounter at the sea, which is the, let's say, the central theme in the Exodus event, or a major event in the Exodus scenario, the crossing of the sea. And sometimes it is called simply crossing of the sea, at times crossing of the Red Sea. And we will do an exegesis of the text. My audio is clear. So first, chapter 13, verses 1 and 2, and verses 11 to 16. The consecration or the redemption of the firstborn. Um, yeah. I said there are two events, and first we will take the consecration or the redemption of the firstborn. I would like to bring to your attention that this tradition of the consecration or the redemption of the firstborn is not related to the Passover account. Um, but the consecration is related to the death of the firstborn. Why the firstborn of the Egyptians are killed, and the firstborn of the Israelites are spared, because of which chapter 13, the text that we are seeing, verses 1 and 2, 11 and 12, will state that every firstborn male, either human or animal, was declared God's property. And every ancient law codes of Israel attest to this ancient custom of redeeming the firstborn, whether human or animal. This is also, see, I have given two references, chapter 22, chapter 34, also in the book of Numbers, the precepts regarding the redemption of the firstborn, how to take back the children, the firstborn. Animals will be offered, will be sacrificed, but the firstborn children will be taken back or redeemed. Purpose of this consecration of the firstborn, the Israel's respect for human life and her special treatment of the firstborn. So, two reasons. Israel will not allow human sacrifice from chapter 22 of Genesis, when Abraham tries to sacrifice Isaac, and in place of Isaac, God gave a ram, a lamb to be sacrificed, and Isaac was redeemed. So maybe from that time, human sacrifice was abolished and forbidden in Israel. So first, respect for human life. Secondly, the special treatment of the firstborn. We know from the biblical tradition, the firstborn enjoys or gets double share of the property and inheritance. There's always a privilege attached to the firstborn. So that will remind us once again of what happened to um, Esau and Jacob, the twins in the mother's womb, and later the struggle to assert one's right, and Jacob trying to get the privilege of the firstborn through cunning ways. Okay, we have seen that. We saw that in the book of Genesis. Okay, now um, to offer to God, that's what the text says. What is this offering to God? Offering to God is same as sacrifice to God. So Israel was aware of the sacrifice of the firstborn among the Canaanites. So there was a practice prevalent among the Canaanites, the custom of offering the firstborn to the god Baal, the Canaanite god Baal, for first of all for fertility, fertility of children in the family, fertility of the cattle and oxen, fertility of the livestock in general. So this was the major reason why the firstborn was sacrificed in the Canaanite cult. Unfortunately, this custom was not too, let's say, uncommon, or at least there were rare incidents of such practices taking place in Israel. We have a number of reference to this in First Kings chapter 16, 34, 2 Kings 16, 3, 21, 6. Prophet Micah speaks about it. So the offering The sacrifice of the firstborn was attested in different parts of the Old Testament. So it was not unknown in the Bible, the sacrifice of the firstborn. Um, when such things took place, and they are aberration and abomination of the sacrality of life, Israel revolted against such practices. So we have a number of texts: Leviticus 18:21, Deuteronomy 12, Jeremiah 7, and so on. A number of passages to um, ban such practices that were abominable. I mentioned about the sacrifice of Isaac in Genesis 22. So many scholars say that the sacrifice of Isaac was an official testimony of the end of such practice of human sacrifice. Okay, also from the book of Judges, the sacrifice of the daughter of Jephthah, the judge, we come to know that exceptionally and strangely, such practices still took place, maybe as an exception. So Israel viewed the firstborn, both of humans and animals, as God's exclusive property. I repeat, the firstborn of both humans and animals were considered God's exclusive property. So they have to be offered to God. Everything of the first fruit. Animals will be sacrificed. The corn and the grain, they will be burnt. But human beings cannot be sacrificed, so they have to be redeemed. That is why when Jesus, as a young child, was offered in the temple, he was redeemed. He was redeemed for an exchange of two pigeons, as we find in the Gospel according to Luke, chapter 2:23. Book of Numbers would say that um, the firstborn could be redeemed, bought back, or taken back for a price of 5 shekels. The book of Numbers, chapter 18:16, would put a cost price for the redemption, a fine. Let's put it as a fine or a cost of the redemption as 5 shekels. Um, so this God's act of redemption is not simply buying back. Okay, so a child, the firstborn child, is costs just 5 shekels. No, it is not buying back. It is there is behind this there is a deep and high sounding theology. I'm not. I would have gone through several texts from the book of Exodus with the different nuances, different words that will point to this whole theology of redemption. I'm not doing that. I'll just mention one or two verbs. The text of coming out or going out of Egypt. They are theological terms referring to Yahweh liberating the people of Israel from slavery. So, coming out or going out, they refer to Lord's liberation of Israel from slavery. So redemption is acquisition of freedom. In chapter 21, 26 to 27, speaks about um, a slave owner. Okay, I will read. When a slave owner strikes the eye of a male or a female slave, destroying it, the, the owner shall let the slave go, a free person, to compensate for the eye. If the owner knocks out a tooth of a male or female slave, the slave shall be let go, a free person, to compensate for the tooth. So there is the possibility of freeing a slave, and that is an exception. Chapter 21, 26, 27. Two exception when they can be the slaves can be set free. And the book of Exodus uses the same verb for Pharaoh. Pharaoh is a slave holder who refused to give freedom to the slaves. So Yahweh, with his might and power, forced Pharaoh to liberate. So redemption of the firstborn of Israelites is um, is like a like letting them out of slavery. It is giving them the freedom. Okay. So for Israel, redemption meant being removed from the malice and the cunningness of Pharaoh. When you look at chapter 13, verse 13, I'm leaving the text between because that will come with regard to the ancient text of unleavened bread. We'll see that after this. Going to chapter 13, verse 13, it's about redemption. Um, it's a especially 13 and 13 speaks about second part. Every firstborn male among your children you shall redeem. Every firstborn male among your children you shall redeem. So all firstborn offered in sacrifice. So he said the redemption is actually offering us sacrifice. Deuteronomy 15. Book of Numbers will say, so when the offerings are made to God in sacrifice, a portion of that went to the priest in the book of Numbers. If you read the first part of chapter 13, it speaks about the firstborn donkey. But every okay, second part, let's read once verse 12. You shall set apart to the Lord all the first opens the womb, all the firstborn of your livestock that are males shall be the Lord's. But every firstborn donkey you shall redeem with a sheep. If you do not redeem it, you must break its neck. So, how do you explain an exception given to the donkey? Why donkey is given an exception? Donkey is an unclean animal. So donkey cannot be offered to the altar, cannot be offered in the temple, cannot be offered to Yahweh. because it is an unclean animal. But they want to redeem it somehow, because donkey was a prized animal, an animal that cannot be killed because of its great value as the animal for work. So, in the ancient Jewish society, they had to depend on donkey. So, they needed donkey, although donkey was considered unclean. Since it was unclean, it cannot be offered to God. So, it has to be redeemed. Like a firstborn of human beings, donkey is to be redeemed. How? Substitute with a lamb or a young one of a goat, or break its neck. Break its neck. Um, the substitution is possible. In the case of human being, it's a substitution. The human being is not killed. Okay, so this is first part of chapter 13, verse 13. Um, so every even unclean animal of the firstborn of all unclean animals will have also to be substituted, because God cannot come closer to anything that is unclean, according to the book of Leviticus, because God is all holy, and unholy things, people, and objects cannot come close to God. As we read in chapter 26, verse 26, it's regard to the unclean animals. Chapter Leviticus 27:26. A firstling of animals, however, which as a firstling belongs to the Lord, cannot be consecrated by anyone, whether ox or sheep, it is the Lord's. Verse 27. If it is an unclean animal, it shall be ransomed at its assessment, with 1/5 added. If it is not redeemed, it shall be sold at its assessment. So to yeah, so to book of Numbers, very similar to the text in Leviticus with regard to unclean animals. For example, we'll just take a sample. That is Numbers chapter 18, verse 15. The first issue of the womb of all creatures, human and animal, which is offered to the Lord, shall be yours. But the firstborn of human beings you shall redeem. So here comes the word redeem. And this has got great theological nuance, which I will also explain. You shall redeem, and the firstborn of unclean animals you shall redeem. And verse 16 speaks about the redemption price. Okay, we shall not bother about the redemption price. So it is there that we come across, like there's 5 shekels and so on. Okay. The redemption of the firstborn of the humans is interpreted as a special dedication to God for the deliverance of the Israelites from Egypt. So God spared all the firstborn of Israel in the or during the 10th plague, which was a fatal plague that paved the way for Pharaoh to let the people of Israel go, where all the firstborn of the Egyptians were killed, according to the Psalm. Also, the firstborn were killed. There, The Israelites were saved. Let's put it as redeemed. So the redemption of the firstborn of the human beings is interpreted as a special dedication to God. So God saved the firstborn of the Israelites. So they have to be, or they belong to God, and they have to be specially dedicated to God. So that's the background of this text. So in the history of Israel, in place of the firstborn who will be redeemed, all Levites were consecrated to God. They have to remain in the temple for the service of worship. All the Levites, yeah, because firstborn, all the firstborn, they have to get back to their work, and they have to get back to their normal life. So, in place of the firstborn of Israelites who are redeemed, the Levites are asked to, they have to be part of, so they have to be part of the ministry, of the service of God, service in the temple. Okay, for example, chapter 3, verse 12. I just read, I hereby, the Lord says, spoke to Moses, I hereby accept the Levites from among the Israelites as substitutes. I repeat, substitutes for all the firstborn that opened the womb among the Israelites. The Levites shall be mine, for all the firstborn are mine. When I killed all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, I consecrated for my own all the firstborn in Israel, both human and animal. They shall be mine. I am the Lord. So here it is very clearly given that Israelites, sorry, the Levites are the substitutes for all the firstborn of Israelites. Okay, so they will be asked to serve in the temple, to minister to the people. Each generation of Jews was obliged to explain the meaning of this redemption to the next generation. And they have to teach their younger generation to observe the consecration of the firstborn. Why they should do that? This is to recall to mind the deliverance of the Israelites by God from Egypt. Now, the meaning of redeemer, redeemer. Um, you know, in the New Testament, also in the prophetic literature, God is called redeemer. But anyone in the family doing a special role can be a redeemer. So a redeemer is the family member who is responsible for the integrity of the family. So he is the one who um, is responsible for the unity, the existence, and the integrity of the family. For example, if the family property is in danger of going to an outsider, then it is the responsibility of the Redeemer to make sure that the property remains with the family. Hmm? So, the Redeemer makes sure that property the family property, the ancestral property does not go in the hand of a foreigner or a stranger or even another Jew, because the family property is sacred. So we have two cases. Okay, if you take the book of Ruth, chapter 4 is the last chapter of Ruth, and, the story of Ruth, a kinsman of Naomi, the mother-in-law of Ruth, or the first husband of yeah of Ruth, called Boaz, will marry Ruth because in order to protect the family property, the family inheritance. If you look at um, chapter 4 of Ruth, Boaz, a relative of Naomi, the mother-in-law, will marry Ruth. In fact, if you know the story, this is Elimelech passed away, died, and his property should be protected, and otherwise the property will go to somebody else. And Ruth is still young enough to have children. So any son she might bear would be considered a child and heir of her deceased husband. So that's the reason why Boaz asserts his claim both to Ruth and to the property of Elimelech. Okay, we know the story. Same in Jeremiah chapter 32. Jeremiah chapter 32. Also, a cousin of Jeremiah has a property. No, 32 of Jeremiah. Okay, Jeremiah purchases the land in his hometown called Anathoth. See, Jeremiah is called to be a prophet, and he leaves his hometown. He preaches, and he is in and around Jerusalem. So he is buying the family property of his cousin. His cousin's name is Hanamel, who had offered to sell his land to Jeremiah. So this chapter 32 in Jeremiah is the most detailed account of a business transaction in the Bible. So this is another example of a redeemer. For example, now Jeremiah becomes a redeemer to save the property of his cousin. The property is not sold outside the family. So that's why the redeemer is a person who intervenes at crucial moments in family life. Redemption is considered as the act of God, like a member of the family. So when you say God is a redeemer and his act is redemption, then God is identified as a member of the family who is interested in other members of the family. When we say God is my redeemer, theologically, God becomes a member of my family. Redemption is much more than simply buying back. So it is not saying, okay, the value of a firstborn son is 5 shekel, that does not mean the value of the child is just 5 shekel. No, it is not simply buying back. It's much more deeply theological. Okay, in the text of Exodus chapter 13, towards the end, um, yeah, he is asked. Moses is asked. Okay, verse 16. It shall redemption, the sign of redemption. It shall serve as a sign on your hand. I am reading from verse 16, 13, 16. It shall serve as a sign on your hand and as an emblem on your forehead, that by strength of hand the Lord brought us out of Egypt. Even earlier in verse 9 is another tradition that speaks of the same thing. It shall serve for you. I'm reading from verse 9, 13:9. It shall serve for you as a sign on your hand and as a reminder on your forehead, so that the teaching of the Lord may be on your lips. For with a strong hand the Lord brought you out of Egypt. You shall keep this ordinance at its proper time from year to year. So this is technically called phylacteries. No, phylacteries. I just read a few passages, especially the first one, verse 16. This is the Jewish religious custom of using phylacteries. I have given the references there, Exodus 13, 9, 16. I read both the text, Deuteronomy chapter 6. Please, when you are free tonight, read Deuteronomy chapter 6 from 6 onwards, 6 to 9. No? Chapter 6, Deuteronomy chapter 6, 6 to 9, because it's one of the most important key passages in the entire Old Testament. And there in Deuteronomy chapter 6, there is a very important command that they should do. In fact, chapter 6, verse 6, verse 4 is actually called the credo, the creed, the one of the most famous statements in the Bible called the Shema. Shema in Hebrew means hear, you hear. Okay, it starts by saying, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. You shall love the Lord your God," and so on. Now I read from the second part of it, verse 7. So recite them, that is what is in verse 4, 5, and 6. Recite them to your children and talk about them when you are at home and when you are away, when you lie down, when you rise. This has to be repeatedly recited. When you are at the home, when you are away, when you lie down, when you rise. Then verse 8. Bind them as a sign on your hand. Fix them as an emblem on your forehead, and write them on the doorpost of your house and on your gates. So Deuteronomy is more elaborate than Exodus 9, chapter 13, 9, and 16. So what is the precept? The precept is that this should be a sign, and they should keep it on their hand and as a memorial between their eyes. That's why they said forehead. Keep this sign as part of your memory constantly to remind you, because one organ of your body that you see often is your hand. So constantly keep it tight on your hand and before their eyes. The Jewish people used this passage in Exodus because that's one of the oldest passages to show the origin of the practice of wearing what we call the phylacteries. What is what are these phylacteries? They are small boxes in which parchments written what I read just now from Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4. Hear, O Israel, Shema Israel, hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one, and so on. They are written on parchment and sealed inside these small boxes and held either with leather straps on the hand or on the forehead. Okay, there's a slide here. You see this figure of a man. You see, this is, I don't know if you're able to see the cursor. Somewhere my cursor is seen. Okay. The what's on the this box on the forehead of this man. Okay. Um, okay. Uh, yeah, I got okay. So this cursor you see here, I unfortunately I wrote it earlier. So there's this is the Hebrew letter Shah, Shah, like a tripod, like a three arrow, a three spear. Letter Shah. Shah is the short form for this Shema. No, Hear, O Israel, the one of the most important texts from the entire Bible. So, what is inside is the summary of that statement. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is one God. So, you may put that into a box and tie it to your forehead. Okay. So too on the arm, a leather strap, and is tied. So here on the hand, you see the leather box. And that leather box is fixed to your arm with the help of this leather strap, right? And it is connected to this finger. Okay. So they are called phylacteries in Hebrew, tefillin, are worn by observant Jewish men each weekday morning during prayer. It's a reminder, two small leather boxes that contain verses from the first, this is what I said is Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4. One tied to the arm and the other placed on head. What's the purpose? It is worn as a reminder of God and to follow Jewish law daily. They are removed at conclusion of morning prayer services. So before a traditional, an observant Jew will tie this to the forehead and to the hand before their morning prayer. So at the conclusion of their morning prayer, they will remove it. So this is a box and the strap, leather strap, that will be used to tie it either on the forehead or on the arm. So two are here. Okay, this is when you go to the um, in Jerusalem, the Wailing Wall, in front of the Wailing Wall, um, on any day for that matter, and especially on Shabbat day, you will find hundreds of Jewish men standing there and making the prayers with the phylacteries tied to the arm and on the forehead. Okay, now we come to the second part of the session. I said we will be concentrating on two events. One is the consecration or the redemption of the firstborn, and the second is the feast of the unleavened bread. In the maybe yeah, a couple of weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, we dealt at length about the origin of the twin feast of the Passover and the unleavened bread. So those of you remember, I said that originally the Passover was the feast of the nomads, the shepherds, and on a full moon night they sacrificed a young goat for the fecundity, for the fertility of the flock, and to ward off evil. Then the feast of the unleavened bread, it was the feast of the farmers to celebrate the harvest of the barley. So on the day the first barley is harvested, they keep away all the grains of the previous year and they make the bread without any leaven and anything of the past. Okay. So this text in chapter 13, verse 3 to 10 reflects another tradition. This is basically a later tradition, especially one part of it is language of the book of Deuteronomy. But when I say language of the book of Deuteronomy, it's a Deuteronomic tradition, but the language is pre-Deuteronomic, which means older than the book of Deuteronomy. So there is a final redactor who placed it here. An old tradition that speaks about the festival of the unleavened bread. So what we saw in chapter 12 is from the priestly tradition in chapter 12. Now, in chapter 13, when it refers to the unleavened bread, this is not connected to the Passover. This is not connected to the Passover at all. So this is coming from a different tradition. And even look at we have the clue. The name of the month is Abib. This is an older name. In chapter 23, verse 15, also will speak about the Abib, the same tradition. The Jewish name of the month is Nisan. Abib is I mentioned the Canaanite name of the month, the Canaanite month Abib, and its equivalent is Jewish name Nisan. And why do they celebrate this? I'm not getting into details because we spoke at length about the origin of the feast of the unleavened bread and how in chapter 12 and later the Judean reform, how these two feasts of Passover and unleavened bread are brought together and they're connected to the feast of the Exodus event. Okay. 13 verse 8 gives us a personal note why this feast has to be celebrated. It says, you shall tell your child or son on that day. It is because of what the Lord did for me when I came out of Egypt. So they are celebrating this unleavened bread. According to this, it is connected to the Exodus event, and not there is no reference to the Passover feast as such. So there's a personal note that the feast of the unleavened bread is linked to the Exodus event. Okay, now we go to the third part of today's session, which is the liberation and departure. They are now going to embark on a tedious and long drawn journey of, let's say, 40 years. So we have the issue of the problem of the root of the Exodus. Um, Today, it is very difficult to trace the route that Moses may have undertaken. Very difficult because in the last 3,000 years, the geography of the place has changed drastically and considerably. Maybe the marshy places and lakes of that time are no more there. They have become a regular land. Later, even the construction of Suez Canal has further changed the physiognomy of the landscape of Egypt. Also, more problematic is the presence of several traditions, sometimes E, sometimes J, sometimes E, J, and P. They all merge. So we have the problem of locating the exact route of the Exodus. Okay, there are three ways to connect Israel with Egypt. The shortest, and that's the route. That's the route that patriarchs took. We know from the book of Genesis. So Abraham came down to Egypt. Isaac came down to Egypt and went back. Jacob came. So it's the shortest route is what we find in chapter 13, verse 17. There is reference to this. The land of the Philistines, the way of the land of the Philistines, along the way of the land of the Philistines. This is called the northern route from Egypt is in the south. Just go up to the land of Israel along the Mediterranean Sea through Gaza. Easiest, shortest, fastest. There is the second route is called through Shur. Those who did the course on Genesis with me will remember the story of Hagar. The angel found Hagar by a spring in the desert, the spring on the road to Shur. So from Sukkot through Kadesh Barnea, going up to the north, Beersheba, and Beersheba is already in Israel. That's the second possible route. Third route is Gulf of Suez across the desert through Ezion Geber, the north of the Gulf of Aqaba, then Edom, Moab, Midian, Arabia, maybe the route that we find in the book of Exodus. See, this is apparent, rather the possible route of Exodus. See, the north of Egypt is Ramses. So we already know very well the places Ramses, Goshen, Pithom, Sukkot. We have heard of all these places. Okay, Ramses and Pithom, the two cities that Israelites built with their hard labor. From already in Genesis, we heard that Joseph managed to keep his family in this fertile land area by the side of this Nile Delta called Goshen. Okay, so we are trying to reconstruct the route, the possible route that are mentioned in the Bible. So from Ramses, Sukkot, and chapter 14 will begin with this place. We will refer to this place P. Hahiroth, and then they cross the sea. Even beginning of 14 will speak to us about the wilderness of Etham, and you see this Rephidim, and it goes up to the land of the Midianites and Edom, Moab, and the book of Deuteronomy ends by the plains of Moab, just at the entry point to Jericho. Moses will only be able to see the land from across the mountain, from standing on the place of Moab. That's a place where John Paul II went in the so-called Great Jubilee year to celebrate the great jubilee of redemption. So he wanted to trace the path of our biblical ancestors, and he wanted to go um, to Baghdad or to Ur, the land, the birthplace of Abraham. And his dream was not fulfilled at that time, but his dream was fulfilled by his successor, Pope Francis. Last week, all of us were attuned to that great event. First time in the history, a pope visiting the land of Abraham, our father in faith. Okay, so this is the possible route. Now, um, the biblical author tells us why God did not allow, or why the people of Israel did not take the shortest and the fastest route. Biblical author tells us it's because God realized that there would be a problem. The easiest, as I said, would be to take what we call the Via Maris. It is called the way of the sea. There is an international highway that connects Egypt to Mesopotamia or Syria. Um, yeah. See, for example, the Via Maris would be so from Egypt, it will be along the Mediterranean. Along the Mediterranean, Gaza is here. It will go, and then along the Galilee, it will reach Syria, and so on. So this was the international highway of the Old Testament. So that would have been the normal route, but they did not take it. Why? There are two things. What says Bible says to avoid the possibility of war. The biblical author says if they take this road, the Philistines are there. They would see they'll have to confront and enter into a war that will make the people of Israel discouraged, and they immediately return or come back to Egypt. And to avoid that, God told them, no, not to take the land. Then there is a reference to the sea. What is this sea? If you look at verse 18, okay, after God said, if the people face war, they may change their minds and return to Egypt. So God led the people by the roundabout way of the wilderness towards the Red Sea. I am reading NRSV. It speaks of Red Sea. Those of you following the NRSV, or even Jerusalem Bible, you'll find a footnote after Red Sea, the sea of reeds, the sea of reeds, because the um, Hebrew word is Yam Suf. Yam Suf. Yam Suf cannot be translated as Red Sea. It cannot be literally translated as Red Sea. Then why all of us are grown with the idea, with the tradition that it was through the Red Sea that the liberation came about? The term Red Sea is actually from the Greek or the Septuagint. The Septuagint is the Greek translation of the Bible. In Greek, it is Erythrathalassa. Erythrathalassa, meaning Red Sea. And Vulgate, the Latin translation, also followed the Greek text of the Red Sea. Instead, the Hebrew original is Yam Suf. As I said in chapter 13, verse 18, if you look at the note, it is translated as the Sea of Reeds. Originally, in the Exodus one place, it simply states, it only speaks of simply sea. Does neither say about Red Sea or Sea of Reeds. Okay, I'm coming back to the issue of okay. Let's take this Yom Suf. So even now, in New American Bible, NAB consistently refers to the Red Sea. Actually, this is the Sea of Reeds or Reed Sea. What is this? The reed. Okay, those who the reed in question is a papyrus plant that is known to grow in the marshes at the north of the delta. Actually, the word papyrus, from where you get the paper, the word paper. So paper of the writing material is made of the papyrus plant that grows in the marshy areas. So there is water, but it is shallow. The reeds grow in that water in the marshy area. So when you say across the sea of reeds, Yam Suf, that will already suggest not the great Red Sea, but a comparatively small body of water. Okay, so we will when we will speak more about it when we deal with the text, when God worked a miracle there in the sea. Okay, let's right now just not be bogged down by this statement. Okay, why? Let's go back to this. Why did they um, change the route? Why did they not take the shortest route? Two reasons. The army checkpoints are there on the Via Maris, the Egyptian army. The Pharaoh's army are being the international highway. Um, Pharaoh's army, there are army checkpoints. Secondly, Moses is already experienced because for he was living in Mount Sinai area. 40 years he had a desert experience. He was in the Midianites, land of the Midianites in that area. So Moses was familiar with the place, in the terrain. So he was able to lead the people through the path that he was familiar with. So these are the two possible reasons why they did not take the shortest route. Okay. In this story of the route map of Exodus, chapter 13, 17 to 22, two traditions merge, and the two dominant traditions, both E and J. Um, Verses 17 and 19, 17 to 19 come from E tradition, while 20 to 22 come from J tradition. So E tradition, according to E tradition, they did not take the way of the Philistines. Fine. At first sight, it's okay. But this E tradition also will refer to places like Ramses, Sukkot, Etam, and Pi Hahiroth. They're all places in the northern route. So if E tradition tells us that they did not go to the north, they did not take the northern route, how come they speak of, they also refer to the places in the northern route? Okay. Second person. Okay, if um, okay, so they did not take the northern route, they took the southern route officially, as we find in verse 18. So they went towards the Red Sea. Now, some of the, you don't have to believe what I'm saying right now, okay? Because these are some of the suggestions made by the scholars. So they would say, the scholars would say, because there are two strong traditions and both refer to different places, maybe there were two groups of people took two different routes. Later, they would have joined in one place. The E tradition, uh, E tradition, which is mainly from the northern tradition. They speak of the northern heroes and northern sanctuaries and cities. And J tradition, basically the southern tradition, the J tradition, um, will take a different route. So according to, let's follow what scholars say. As I said, you don't have to take it, but I'm just mentioning it to you. The possibility of two routes taken by two different groups of Jewish Israelite tribes. They call us Leah tribe, the southern tribe, Leah tribe, or children of Leah, Reuben, Levi, and Judah. They may have taken the northern route, while the southern route followed by the northern tribes, Benjamin, Ephraim, Manasseh. They are called Rachel tribe, the children of Rachel or Rachel, Benjamin and Joseph's two tribes, Ephraim and Manasseh. They may have taken the southern route under the leadership of Moses. Okay. So these are all theories. You don't have to adhere to this. You don't have to subscribe to this one. There are all possibilities suggested by the scholars to bring the gap between the two traditions. Okay. Now, I want to highlight a very, very, very important theological statement, which is repeatedly stated. A pillar of a cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. I repeat, pillar of a cloud by day and pillar of a cloud by night. Especially verse 21, 22, it will be repeated again and again and again. I'll just read part of it. In 21, the Lord went in front of them in a pillar of cloud by day to lead them along the way, and in a pillar of fire by night to give them light, so that they might travel by day and by night. 22. Neither the pillar of cloud by day nor the pillar of fire by night left its place in front of the people. Please take this to heart. This is a phrase which is very close to the heart of biblical tradition coming from the Exodus movement. Whether it is E tradition or J tradition or P tradition, they all speak something similar to this. In short, it is a symbol of divine presence. Symbol of divine presence. In the Pentateuch, whether it is in Exodus or in Deuteronomy, anywhere, whether the reference is to pillar of cloud and pillar of fire. So when you find a pillar of cloud and pillar of fire, that particular statement, typical phrase, is from J tradition to show God's presence. E tradition will give another statement, another phrase, dark mist and the cloud. Instead, the priestly tradition, in order to convey the message of the presence of God, is coupled with the cloud, glory of God, consuming fire which moves like Yahweh. So, reference to Yahweh himself, P tradition. In whatever it is, the mythical theology makes much of these ideas or images. So simply is to state that God is present. God's presence is narrated and highlighted by the three traditions. And their tradition is repeatedly stating that famous statement, pillar of cloud by day and pillar of fire by night. Um, the cloud of fire is Israel's perception of God's presence in the key events of the Exodus and their 40 years of wandering in the desert. I like to make this statement. It's also from the commentaries. This may reflect the ancient custom of carrying a burning brazier at the head of the marching army or a caravan to indicate the line of march by day and night. So, they are not, they don't have the possibility of light, electricity. So how do they keep themselves watchful at night? So they carried when they went as an army, they carried fire to lead them, to show them, to light. So in the Bible, this is the typical and the traditional way of expressing God's presence and guidance. In chapter 19:9, I have mentioned, and chapter 33, chapter 40, book of Exodus concludes with the repeated phrase of the presence of God, pillar of cloud by day and pillar of fire by night. Why? What is the symbol of this cloud and fire? Cloud and fire. See, during the day, days are very hot and warm in the desert. It is to say, God is protecting them. Without the cloud, they would be burnt. They would burn because terrible heat in the desert. And day and nights are cold. Nights are cold. So they need God's presence at night to keep them warm. And nights can be very cold, so they need to keep themselves warm. So, in short, this is to say 24/7 protection of God. God protects them during the day, during the night, every moment of every day of 365 days of the year. Okay, I think I'll take a break now. I stop now. So if you have questions, I will take up. You can directly make the questions to brother. If there are questions, I will take up, or I will continue with the next chapter. If we have just oh no, we don't have much time. Yeah, brother, you can either post it here or you can ask if there are questions. Pardon? In the chat box, brother, are there questions?
Okay, we thank Father Shabu for the wonderful presentation.
No, any questions? Any questions?
Yeah, there are questions. First, what is the logic in breaking a donkey's neck? Is it not as good as making it useless or killing it? I repeat, what is the logic in breaking a donkey's neck? Is it not as good as making it useless or killing it?
That is okay. Would you switch off that mic, the speaker there? No, there will be echo. Okay. Yeah. It is. Can you switch off that speaker there? There will be echo. Okay. Maybe you can mute it there. Yeah. The purpose is not. The purpose is not to make the animal handicap. The possibility is there to substitute with a lamb or a kid, young of a goat. They have to be redeemed because that animal has to be utilized for your purpose. So, in case there's no possibility of finding a lamb or a goat, then as a symbol, you're not you're not making it useless. I think after that they still be able to. But it sounds strange, but it's an exception. But the first thing is to find a lamb or a goat to redeem it. And in order to show that it is not equivalent to other clean animals, that may be the reason why they have just made a statement. And it is not that they have done it, they should do it. They may not have done it.
The next question. What is there is a theory that the or cloud and pillar of fire represented a volcano which during day appeared as cloud and at night as fire. What is the explanation to this?
It's very unlikely because this tradition is so much inherent in the psyche of Israel right from the beginning. And I have mentioned that Exodus is one of the oldest books in the Bible. So the repeated use of this in all the traditions, J, P, and E will state that somehow they really felt the presence of God, that were uh, there were visible signs of God's presence. Okay, it's a maybe an idiom that they used. So maybe a scientific try someone trying to give a natural explanation to that. Maybe I don't know, but I don't think it is. At least people of Israel did not think it that way. Okay. In the modern times, one may be able to may try to give an explanation, which I don't know if it is really true. But the fact that this was ingrained in all the tradition, that there must have been something special.
The next question. Is there any connection between Jesus' crucifixion and the passage on the firstborn?
Yeah, New Testament. Yes, New Testament takes the image of Jesus, the redeeming, redeeming um, the people, that through the blood of Jesus, he redeems. That's why it's called the Redeemer. Maybe we'll take it up maybe later, but the connection is there. Connection is there. Since that's not the main issue, I'm not going into detail. There is a link. I think it's
Instead of having such boxes tied around their heads and bodies, couldn't they do tattoos on their faces?
no, no, no. I don't. I haven't seen. That's not in their custom. Tattoos. No, it is a. They do it during their morning prayer. Even now, in the for their morning prayer, and every Saturday, every Sabbath, when they come to every day when they come to the Wailing Wall, they tie this and they pray. Also, the last part of verse 9, Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 9, also on they will tie it on the lintels of the door, no doorpost, on the doorpost, and they touch the lintel whenever they come out or whenever they go into the room or when they come out of any room, they will touch it as a sign of respect. If you have seen the movie Fiddler on the Roof, you will see the Jewish family, the father and all the members there. Whenever they come out of the house, when they enter in the house, they touch the lintel of the door and they take it to their forehead as a respect. Because in that box, what we call that, it's the text of the Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4. Shema Israel, the Lord, hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one Lord, etc. is written. It's a sacred text.
When we read Exodus, it shows the great power of God, and I feel we don't meet with God's purity requirement. But according to Jesus' teaching, we take God as forgiving and kind God. Is that correct?
Could you repeat that? I did not get the connection.
When we read Exodus,
Ah,
it shows the great power of God,
yeah.
and I feel we don't meet with
God's.
God's purity, or is a bracket requirement. But according to Jesus' teaching, we take God as forgiving and kind God. Is that correct?
I don't think there is any dichotomy. No? God is so great and majestic and marvelous. We cannot reduce God to anything that is just one aspect. We cannot reduce. We fall into the fallacy of reductionism. Okay, we'll say, okay, God is this, God is just that. No, God is. So in God, there is this aspect of love and mercy and compassion. Same time, He's also magnificent and glorious God. No? These aspects are there, and they are not contradictory. They are not contradictory.
Is the religious custom of using phylacteries followed even to this day?
Oh, very much. Yes, 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 very much. Even today, they use the phylacteries as a very, very common sight. Okay, I think we will conclude. There is,
Yeah, there are.
but I have.
What does it mean to be firstborn as property of God? What does it mean to be firstborn as property of God?
Okay, yeah. Let's get back to the 10th plague. No? God saved the firstborn of the Israelites because they belong to God. God spared them. And so, since God spared them because they belong to Him, and they cannot be always sitting down with God. So, in order to symbolically say that they belong to God, but they have to, when you say belong to God 100%, you have to remain even physically, for the service of God. Since that is not always possible, you take, okay, like in inverted commas, buy back that person. You know? Jesus did, the parents of Jesus did that in chapter 2 of Luke's Gospel. He was offered in the temple and he was taken back for a substitution of two pigeons, because the family was poor. They could not afford to donate or sacrifice a lamb, and they offered what was possible for a poor family. So a poor family could substitute with two pigeons. So, technically, the firstborn belonged to God, and then you take it back by offering a kind of a ransom or a redemption price.
From the last class, is there any significance of not boiling the meat in, I think, Exodus 12:9 and burning the leftover in Exodus 12:10?
Yeah. Maybe I need some time to explain that. Um, that will take, maybe tomorrow I will take it up. Okay. I think it's since it is time 7:30, 7:30 Indian time. So we will shall we conclude? Please, we will come back on Saturday, um, and definitely I will conclude chapter 14. 15 is a great chapter with the two old, let's say, oldest hymns in the Bible, the song of Moses and the song of Miriam. I will please come prepared with chapter 14, 15, and 16 for the coming Saturday's class.
Okay, we thank Father Shabu for the presentation. Let us conclude. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as
As
it
it
was in
was
the
in the
beginning,
beginning,
is
is
now,
now,
and
and
ever
ever shall
shall
be,
be,
world
world
without.
without end. Amen.
Amen.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen. Okay, God bless. And once again, Shabbat. Sabbath is next, okay, day after tomorrow. But shalom and God bless. See you.